COC presents Let's Talk. Hey everyone, welcome back to Let's Talk. I'm Isaac. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm with Congress of Communities, along with our speakers Ellie and Stephanie. Tagging with us, we bring you two other special guest speakers, but from the youth Moash. Today, we want to talk to you broadly on the topic of sex education in our schools and how it can negatively affect us without having any knowledge about this sort of stuff. For instance, when I took health class, I didn't really learn much about it because the teacher mostly assigned bookwork, which I considered boring. Everyone has their own learning style, whether it's by listening, visual, or hands-on. Now to Ellie.
Thank you, Isaac. Today we will introduce the participants as well as us, the youth who have worked on this podcast for you guys. Hi, my name is Ellie. My pronouns are she, hers. And I have been with the Youth Council for almost 2 years now. And I'm really excited to be here. I'll pass it on to Stephanie.
Hello, my name is Stephanie. I use she, her pronouns. This is my first year on Youth Council, and I'm also really excited to be here and be able to hear all these stories that everybody's going to share today. And we'll pass it on to the youth from Moash.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kayla Shannon. I use she, her pronouns, and I've been working for Moash for about 2 years now. So I'm really glad to be here. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Hi everyone, my name is Manath Mohindra. My pronouns are she, hers. And I have also been working with Moash for about a year and a half. And so I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Ellie. Just to tell you quickly a little bit about what MOASH is and what we do. So MOASH actually stands for the Michigan Organization on Adolescent Sexual Health. And so our focus is making sure that we're getting affirmative and accurate information about reproductive health to as many young people as possible, but also having important discussions about STIs and STDs and the information about, first of all, destigmatizing those, but also letting young people know what resources they have, et cetera, et cetera. So just about anything reproductive health related, especially as it relates to young people, we do it.
Thank you. So let's get straight to the point. The first question that I would like to ask you guys is, what was your health class like? I know that it could be very different depending on your identity, where you grew up, where the people that are surrounded by, or just in general what your school teaches. So could Kayla go first?
Yeah, and so I've had several health class experiences. I always think it's really funny to like talk about health classes because they mostly just talked about like physical health, like work out and eat well. And then there was like this one little 2-week unit where they were like, oh, also, and sex is a thing, be safe. Next. Or not even really be safe, but like don't do it and that'll keep you safe. Next. And so that basically summarizes what my health class experience as far as reproductive health and reproductive education has been. A lot of abstinence based, a lot of, the safest, the most effective way to keep yourself protected is simply by not having sex, which for most high schoolers know that that's just a bit unrealistic. And even, I mean, some middle schoolers like know that that's unrealistic. And so we sort of had like the first talk where they were like, oh, you get periods, these are pads and tampons, but that was segregated by gender. So interesting. And then from there we had the 8th grade talk about about sex ed, which was in my science class. And that was also a very short topic that we covered. And I remember that was kind of a joke and definitely very fear-based, definitely very much so. I'm going to show you pictures and hopefully it'll scare you away from either sex or maybe STIs or STDs. I'm not really sure what the goal was there. And then from there into high school, I learned reproductive health for the last time and still felt just as unfulfilled as I felt in every other situation or in every other circumstance that they'd attempted to teach me about reproductive health. So my experience hasn't been the best, to say the least, but hopefully with the work that we're doing and with important conversations like this, we'll be able to move the needle towards more accurate and affirming sex education.
I'm going to be pretty honest with you. My experience has been quite similar to Kayla, and the fact that it was really based off of abstinence, right? The private middle school that I attended only offered sex education, I believe, once or twice, half a day each, throughout my entirety of my 3-year experience there. And then, of course, as an elementary student, I really wasn't taught anything in my the other private school. And once I got to high school, I believe that it was a topic that my public school attempted to address, but as I think we are going to touch on many times today, they failed at. They really failed at the education and providing that proper education, fulfilling those needs of us as youth needing to understand both our bodies and sexual health as a whole. So I think that in all honesty, it was very similar to Kayla's.
For me, all throughout elementary school, we never had a health class, which is wild to me because you'd think they'd start teaching you young. And then middle school came around, still no health class, but they did slightly teach us only a little bit of health when our PE teacher was absent. And we would get books and learn about, oh, why alcoholism is bad, why doing drugs is bad, exercise, or else you're not going to be healthy. Watch your calories. Bring back this calendar of what foods you ate throughout the week and how much calories it was. And that's all we did in middle school, which isn't really a big help. You know, you don't get the basics that you need to learn as a young kid to know what to expect in the future. And now I'm in my first year of high school. I've had a health class for half of the year, and so far they haven't taught us anything about sex ed. Um, all they have taught us is, oh, eat healthy, um, exercise, watch your calories, don't do drugs, don't drink alcohol at a young age. Nothing about anything else really. Nothing about our bodies, nothing about sex ed, nothing like that. And I really think that they should be teaching us these things because when I was younger, I didn't know what any of those periods were. I didn't know what that was, and when I got mine, I didn't know what it was. Like, I should have known what it was because that is something school should be teaching us.
I kind of had similar experiences. I went, we go through all of our school lives, and I've only had a health class for half of a semester of high school. As a queer youth, there isn't a lot of representation in health education at all. It's all mostly cisgendered, or in general, just misogynistic as well. I feel like there's also a lot of hidden truth behind the women body just because of how health textbooks were made. There's a lot of things about the human body that we don't know just because people were, sexist throughout the past. And health class in general was, to me, I never really saw it as a health class. I was also just taught a little bit about food, and then someone would come and talk to us about it, and that was it. I even remember doing presentations on careers during a health class, and I was extremely confused the whole time. Like, why are we talking about careers during health? Again, I'm going to point back to the fact that I am a queer person, so I don't fit the category of wanting to learn health-based education for whether it's like towards my sexuality or towards my identity, because one's identity and sexuality can be also connected back to health education, learning about oneself, one's body, one's mind even. And speaking of mind, also a lot of mental illnesses. There's only a couple of them that are ever really talked about, and it's like, oh, it's just these three mental illnesses that exist, and like that's all you ever hear. And then a lot of youth end up growing up not knowing or recognizing, especially in POC communities, or just not acknowledging it in general because they never learned the destigmatization or just facts. Like that's the thing, facts. We just don't have facts, and we don't have the things that we want to learn. So yeah, my next question for you guys is, what do you guys want to see taught in health education, or what you yourself as youth would have liked to see growing up? I'll pass it to Stephanie.
Personally, I would have loved to have seen how the body works, what happens as you grow up, what periods are, what happens during puberty, mental health, how to manage mental health, and all the different mental health issues you could encounter while growing up, and how to deal with them properly, as well as how to form healthy relationships. But unfortunately, I didn't get any of that, and that's what I really hope will be taught in the future. And I'll pass it on to Kayla.
Yeah, I actually was just gonna comment on what Ellie was saying, but I also think it relates to this topic because it definitely is something that I would like to see. I didn't realize until after I graduated high school that all of our models of the human body had been men. And I didn't think about the fact that like that matters, right? Like I have only ever seen the muscular systems of men in class. I don't know if it's maybe because they didn't want to have to like show breasts, or like if they thought that would have been awkward, but it's like I had to see their peen, so like their penis, so why can't you see boobs? Like boobs exist, right? And I didn't realize that that mattered until I got older, and now it's like my understanding, or my like my default when I think of what does the human body look like is a man. Like what does the human body look like under the skin, and like the actual systems of it. So that's one thing that I would like to see, just acknowledging the fact that both female and male bodies should be shown and appreciated in health education equally. Like it doesn't make sense for them not to be. But another thing that I would really like to see is for health classes to acknowledge and actively work to and actively work against health disparities between racial groups. That's something that I didn't see enough of. And when they were talking about health, when they were talking about your physical health, they weren't, in my experience, they haven't put a lot of emphasis on what am I most at risk at? What am I at most risk of because of my race? And as a Black woman living in America, like there are so many different health health risks that I am at a larger that I have a larger chance of being exposed to. And I just wish that's something that we would have talked about, like talk when we talk about diet, when we talk about how to care, but also when we talk about mental health. One thing that I really, really think is missing is the conversation of how do social issues impact our mental health? How has my trauma of living as a person of color, and a woman at that, and even a young person, how does that impact my ability to show up in spaces and be healthy mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually? Because there are differences, and I feel like those are the conversations that we just avoided, and they sort of just handed us this, what they believe to be this catch-all guide, but what really just applied to like cisgendered men and women in some cases, but mostly like cisgendered men. and statistics that were mostly based on studies from cisgendered white men at that. So it's just like inclusivity in general as a whole is so necessary.
I completely and utterly agree with you. I actually have never noticed that, Kayla, before you pointed it out, that the figure of a man was our stencil. But quite honestly, in reflection, it was. Throughout elementary and middle school, all that I can remember, if we ever learned anything, or even high school, it was mainly focused on the figure of a man. I think that a lot of the health classes that I was educated throughout high school, a lot of it was focused around tobacco products, negative consequences in utilization of tobacco and vaping, and drug abuse, alcohol abuse, all of which I am not at all putting down in or demeaning in any way. They are incredibly important topics, and they should be discussed. They need to be addressed, especially among youth. But I do agree with both Stephanie and Kayla when they discuss that mental health is incredibly important, and yet it's almost shoved aside, right? When you look at the how they divvy up how much time they spend on each of the topics, mental health is almost shoved aside along with relationships. How do you form proper relationships? How is that affected by mental health? And how do those relationships that you are capable of forming affect your sexual reproduction? How does it have a relationship with that? So everything sort of ties together, and yet they failed to address the uh, the main topics. So I think that other than sexual education and reproduction, relationships and its correlation with mental health need to be really, really focused on, because they aren't. They're like I said, shoved to the side and almost completely forgotten about in the long scheme of things.
Man, where do I even start? There's a lot of things, that we weren't taught, and a lot of things that I would like to learn. Um, I guess I want to start with representation. There isn't a lot of representation of disabled, mostly able-bodied people are shown in health books. And my brother is half deaf in one ear, and I completely forget sometimes because it's just like awareness comes to learning about the things you grow up with. So if I had learned about certain things, I'd be more aware about those things as well. And I feel like that applies to a lot of people. If uh, queerness or LGBTQIA was shown more in health books, it would be a lot less homophobia and a lot less in what's called ignorance in the society, because it wouldn't be something unknown anymore. It would be something that people know and would recognize as normal. And I think that health books have a great important part in being able to normalize things in society that are normal and that we see weird just because of the way that we were raised in this, you know, just in schools and in society because of white supremacy. But we can talk about that later. I guess another thing I did want to talk about also is sexual transmitted diseases. There's always talked about in such a taboo way, as if they were gross, as if you had it, wow, that's disgusting. Like people would talk down on you. People would be like, ooh, like that person is no. It should be normalized. Some people are born with it. Some people don't even know they have it, and they're a lot more common than people think. And there's so many different as well. And people just think of it as like this one thing, just this one sickness that just everybody has, and that's that. And yeah, those are the things I wish I had learned about, just so I could broaden my perspective, not just on things about myself, but to learn about other people as well.
Yeah, Ellie, I think you make a really good point. STIs and STDs are something that are so taboo, and it's so interesting that because they're so taboo, it's causing young people to receive less and less information about how to prevent them and how to protect themselves from them. And so it's really counterproductive, because it's like we've made it taboo because we think that they're dirty, and because we know that, I mean, no one wants an STI or an STD. It's not something that we're praying for, I hope I get one. But by making it a taboo subject that we're not able to speak about openly and freely, we're simply making people more at risk to get one. Like there are so many young people that, because they don't really know what STIs and STDs are, or what it looks like, or whether or not they really can get symptoms, just go untested. And so what that means is we have so many young people that go untested and continue to be sexually active because they don't really know that you should be being tested regularly. And that being tested regularly doesn't mean that you're dirty. It's just like, in the same way that you go get oral cleanings on a regular basis, in the same way that you go to the doctor on a regular basis to get physical checkups, like you should be checking up on your reproductive system on a regular basis in the same way. So that's definitely something that we have to do the work to destigmatize, because truly, if this is something that we want to decrease the likelihood of, especially in the community of young people who are, for the most part, just transitioning into knowing their bodies and recognizing their sexual pleasures and recognizing what they want and recognizing bodily autonomy in general, it's so important for us to, as we enter and transition into this stage of our lives, that we be well informed about how to protect ourselves, and that this not be something that we just have to fumble our way through, right? And then maybe not realize that, oh, you're supposed to get regular checkups after you've already contracted an STI or an STD. So that's definitely something that we need to have conversation about to destigmatize, but also so that we can be protected.
I know earlier I was talking about white supremacy and how that all ties back to why we haven't learned the things that we should be learning. I kind of want all of us to kind of just, put our little voice in on why we like talk about this issue. To me, it just seems like it's just, the male cis, the big male cis, that they are, or just in general, people are afraid of a lot of things that they don't understand. And when that happens, the people in power implement laws and implement they implement laws and they implement like education and systems that we don't even have control over. We don't get to choose what we get to learn. The old people that don't even go to school anymore, they get to choose what we get to learn. Does someone want to talk about like the education and how all that, or like how laws and all that is connected into the health education?
I would love to. So I and a little more than a dozen MOASH representatives in February of 2020 went to Lansing, Michigan to look for sponsors for 3 bills that would help to refine and fix the sexual education system in Michigan. And I think that once I discuss what each of these 3 bills were on, I think that we can use those ideas that were in these bills to both build or both fix and or entirely rebuild the sexual health education system in Michigan. So the first one was House Bill 5499. Now, this bill was meant to clarify the current Michigan law by changing shall not be medically inaccurate to read must be medically accurate and objective with respect to health education. It would also aim to expand curricular opportunities to affirm all gender and sexual orientations. The second bill was House Bill 5500. This bill would revise health education curriculum to emphasize the necessity of enthusiastic, freely given consent to sexual activity. It would also create a component of the curriculum on the prevention of sexual assault and dating violence. The bill also specified departments and community partners that would need to be consulted in the development of these new lessons and material. And then the last of the 3 was House Bill 5501. Now, this bill was meant to expand currently mandated HIV and AIDS education to include medically accurate teaching on post-EP and pre-EP medications. So those are three examples of legislative work that's been done to sort of fix our sexual health education system in Michigan. But I think that it also calls into question the factor of, can our system be fixed? Because quite frankly, when you look at everything, look at all the issues that we have, look at all the problems, um, the phrase "the system needs to burn" comes to mind, because it does need to burn, because there are two options, there are two paths that we can take at this point, right? We can attempt to fix it, attempt to take it apart piece by piece and sort of fix it slowly, go through all the legal work that needs to be done, or we can completely tear it apart and build a whole new system that doesn't have all these flaws that need to be worked through, right? It starts off fresh with the important components of inclusivity and medically accurate statements. And I think that not only does that really need to be taken into consideration, but it also needs to be, something needs to be done, right? There needs to be action taken on it, because we can sit here and talk about it all day. But things like supporting bills like that and writing bills like that, I think it needs to continue. And not only for those three bills, there needs to be a lot more support behind it.
I totally agree with you, because I think this idea of fixing the system, right? It, like you said, it requires like you take it apart, right? But when you're fixing something and you're putting back together, the implication is that there are things in it currently, there are portions of it currently that aren't broken. And it's like, when all of it is broken, do you keep trying? It's like if a glass vase fell apart, right? And it just shattered and it broke everywhere and it spread all over the ground. Like, that's what we have, a broken system. And it's like, at some point you stop trying to put together glass shards. We're just getting cut in the process, because it's like, for every single glass shard that we put back into place, there's still the remnants of um the old broken system that was just founded on white supremacy and patriarchy and imperialism and capitalism, all of these things that encourage a lack of transparency in order to control. And that's really what it is. It all comes down to control. And I think the reason that adults or those in power who create these systems of education, the reason that they're so dead set on making it lack as much transparency as possible is because they're afraid of what would happen if we really had autonomy. There's this idea that, like, we as people require guardrails in order to function as a society, right? Which, to an extent, I guess, I mean, like, I'm not really a fan of rules, but like, whatever. But really, all that it does, by making us function within this bubble, all that it does is really make us move more chaotically, and it creates actually more confusion. It creates, because it allows space for miseducation. It allows space for young people to feel even more discomfort. It makes young people feel like, if I can't talk about my body, is my body valid? Is my body safe? Like, if I can't speak about my body, if I can't speak about my body transparently in a health education class, how will I advocate for myself in a bed? Huh? Like, how? How can I? Or for me, even what's so important and so sad about this is it makes it really hard for people to understand and know what consent is and what consent isn't, because that's not a conversation that we're having. We're so busy telling young people, just don't have sex, just don't do it, which, if we learned anything from prohibition, we know that telling people no is not the way to stop them, right? And so all it's doing is making youth even more uncomfortable with consent. And we wonder why people think the lack of a no means yes, because no one told them otherwise. And because we're not willing to have transparent conversation in the spaces that matter about what consent is and about affirming education. If you don't, once again, if I don't feel affirmed in the classroom, how will I ever apply any of these concepts in the real world?
Thank you so much. You made such great points. So are there other ideas you all could think of to improve sex education for students in Michigan? I can go ahead and name a few off the top of my head. Some are like giving more options or freedom to teachers to be able to teach inclusive curricula, whether that's bringing in speakers that are sexual assault survivors, people with the LGBTQIA experience, people with disabilities, just people to come talk to you. Again, just giving uh, teachers the option to teach in a way that's accessible to everyone in the class, because each classroom, each district, each city is going to be different. For example, minorities in polluted areas are going to need more teachings on how to improve their physical health, because it's not their fault that their lungs aren't the best due to the factories around their cities. Um,
Thanks, everyone. I agree that this is all super frustrating and might take some time to truly change some of the issues around health classes and sex education that we're talking about. But in the meantime, I think there's a few things people can do to improve things for students in Michigan, at least a little bit, right? We're going to be sharing this podcast with youth, parents, teachers, community organizers, politicians, etc. for the Moash youth. What kind of things do you want them to know? Do you have any calls to action?
So the first thing that I would say is just practicing the concepts that we've spoken about. I think transparency is so important. Being honest, being open, and making students feel safe in your environment, whether that environment be your home or the classroom or any outside extracurricular activity. And a part of creating these safe and affirming environments for students is one, using the words that you mean, right? Not saying kuka when you mean vagina, right? Not saying weenie when you mean penis. It's these kinds of things that create stigmas around reproductive health and bodily organs. Like, I don't say fingy when I mean finger. So if you're not going to use accurate words for all of the body parts, then then don't. So that's my first thing, but also being very clear and intentional about the language that you use when you're describing different things, right? And not making it seem as if these kinds of things are dirty or these kinds of things are wrong, because you really never know what students have going on outside of your classroom, right? And making it seem as though some things are more valid or that students have rights to their bodies in some ways but not others will simply just have the end impact of them feeling uncomfortable coming to you with any of their information. Because if you've already shamed me in these ways unintentionally, I know that you're going to shame me in other ways when I come to you directly. So I think transparency is really, really important. And then once again, using the words that you mean.
I completely agree. I think inclusivity is an absolute necessity, and that also applies to the vocabulary. That is incredibly important. And if anything needs to be done, it does need to be both the inclusivity and vocabulary aspects. I also think that simply donating to organizations around you, addressing these topics, and showing your way, showing your support in that manner, that could greatly help. But also, if you have any time at all, simply educate yourself. I think we are so undereducated, and then nobody actually takes the time to get the facts. So do that. If you have any spare time, educate yourself, and then use that education to help educate others and to provide resources for others.
as a last input, I kind of wanted to talk about another organization called La Vida that does a lot of work around consent, relationships, empathy, or even just your self-esteem. I joined La Vida around seventh grade, which I want to say was so impactful. I've honestly grown so much as a person just because I've learned about things that a lot of youth don't get to learn about. I got to teach college students about consent when I was in middle school, and that was kind of a shock to me, because like in general there's all these things that you don't get taught, and that you have to go outside of school to other organizations to learn this. And a lot of youth don't get the opportunity to go to other organizations or to go outside of school to learn all these things. And it doesn't always have to be textbook strict or like boring. Like the way that we were taught about relationships, about red and green flags, healthy relationships with your family or with your relationships, it was in a way where it was fun and that where it wasn't embarrassing to talk about things that society usually um, degrades you for. In general, I think it's very important for people to learn about these things because it can change someone's life, it could save someone's life, and it could even inform people on what to do when they're in danger, when they're having issues, or just in general, a normal everyday occurrence of something as simple as someone's menstruation cycle.
Thanks so much, everyone. If you're listening to this podcast, please share it with your friends and family, especially these calls to actions we just mentioned that will help make health classes better for students in Michigan.